Welcome back, everybody. It's good to see you all again. It's Matt, that firefighter medic guy. I am that guy. Good to see you all again. I'm at home, as you can tell. And look, I actually own clothing that has sleeves on it. It's incredible, isn't it? I thought I would, dress somewhat presentable to do a home podcast, home vlog, whatever you want to call it. You know, we're getting that time of year now where I actually go out into the theme parks and even on my adventures that I plan, and I can wear shirts with sleeves on them or maybe even long pants for once and stop dressing like I'm one of the boxcar children. Anybody remember that book? That was a good book. I think my first or second grade teacher read that to us. This was a really good book. But I explained it once before, not to get off track, but I in the summertime, I love wearing the sleeveless shirts because, one, you get the benefits of getting the sun from it, but also when you're out and about doing videos and all that stuff in the summer warmth and the humidity, it's comfortable, and comfort overrides everything else. I could give a damn what people think. I'm out there to be comfortable, but I am looking forward to the cooler weather ahead so I can start, sewing the sleeves back on and going out and doing our adventures around the theme parks and around Florida and in the country again. So looking forward to that. All right, today's vlog. This one is going to be, it's going to be a doozy. I've been putting this off for a while. I almost didn't make this vlog, but there's so many videos out there about the Stardust Racers incident that happened it's almost a week ago now. There's so many people out there talking about what they think happened or what may have happened, and just countless channels. And I've watched a lot of them trying to get everybody's input. And of course, the one thing I have that nobody else has that's doing these vlogs on what happened on Stardust Racers is I have an emergency medical background and I work in the theme parks here in Orlando, Florida. And so after watching Ryan, the Ride Mechanics vlog on this today, and then there was been another one, I think his name is Jared from Capture the Magic. He's done several of these updates with Stardust Racers. And I've taken everything into consideration, listened to what they've said, tried to put everything together. And everybody has said the same thing. Nobody knows what happens. Well, they're trying to figure out, what caused all of this. And so my paramedic mind starts turning around, and I'm thinking, what could have caused this? Now, I want to be clear. I don't work at Universal. I don't work at Epic Universe. I have worked at Universal before, but I don't currently. I work at the other parks here in Orlando as a medic. And working at those parks, you get to know how these rides work and why they have the safety precautions in place that they do, and why it's very important that guests follow them. My like I said, my paramedic brain starts working, and I start thinking what could cause this? And so this is nothing official. This is what my mind has created, and why. If I am correct on this, we are going to see sweeping changes across the amusement park industry, not only here in the United States, but around the globe. And it's probably not going to make people happy. And if anything, ride restrictions on these types of aggressive rides are to get a lot more stricter, and it's going to be very, very strict about who's going to be able to ride these. Now, is that an actual thing that's in place? No, let's get that clear. This is I'm foreshadowing as to what I believe is going to come out of this, because we have to prevent this from happening again. You can't have this happen, right? And so I'm going to start here with this. So one, I want to be careful about how I do this, because I want to, we want to protect the integrity of the deceased. This young man's name was Kevin Rodriguez Zavala. Hope I pronounced that right. Thoughts and prayers are with him and his family. This is obviously a very difficult time. A lot of confusion, a lot of frustration, a lot of just unknowns as to how and why this happened. There's a lot of people trying to guess. And there's countless vlogs out there about, there might have been a piece hanging off the ride. There might so many things. How did it, if something struck him, then how was it just him? And all of these things. The way I kind of piece this together is when you look at the picture of this young man, and if you want to see his picture, just type his name into Google. I'm not going to show it. Like I said, I want to try to be as cordial as possible in explaining this. But the description I would have of him is the picture they're showing. He was in Super Nintendo World. He is in a wheelchair. He is a big guy. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. He is a big guy. And he had a lot of his weight was carried around the center mass of his body, meaning around the stomach area. And then his legs were very small as compared to his upper body, which would indicate, they said that he had a spinal injury. If that's the case, which would likely lead me to believe that he was a paraplegic, and I put those two things together because if you look closely, he has a belt around his waist. People that are paraplegics, and especially that are on the heavier side, they're going to be belted into a wheelchair, and their legs will also be fastened to the footrests because they have no control. You have to keep them in place, right? When a person is paralyzed below the waist or wherever the paralysis is, the parts of the body that are paralyzed go through a condition called atrophy, meaning you lose your muscle mass, you start losing your bone mass. And things become weaker and weaker and weaker because they're not getting any exercise, they're not getting any nutrients. They just basically sit there and they dissolve over time. Even the paraplegics, paralyzed below the waist that do the wheelchair racing competitions, they're built like, monsters up top, but their legs are super tiny because they just don't have any way to exercise them. And so they go through a condition called atrophy. When somebody is heavy like this gentleman was, they have to be belted into the chair, and so that's so they don't get top heavy and fall forward. That belt is to hold them in there. And I've actually come across this at times when I've gone on emergency calls. I've dealt with paraplegics in the past, and you have to be very careful with these individuals because if you go and release that belt without having the proper personnel in place to hold them up, they'll fall straight forward out of the chair, especially if they have a larger body up top because they don't have any core strength. They don't obviously have any leg strength. There's nothing that they can do to hold themselves. And even for them to reach out and try to grab something, they're just not strong enough, and they can fall forward and straight out of the chair and flat onto the ground, and then you're in big trouble if that happens. So you have to be very careful with these people. In his circumstance, though, he did ride this ride 5 or 6 times, and it was on the 5th or 6th time that this incident happened. If you've noticed, Stardust Racers, the way the seat is designed and the way the lap bar is, I've ridden Stardust Racers 4 or 5 times. I've ridden both tracks, and like I said, multiple times. I can't do it back to back because it is that extreme. I love roller coasters, but I cannot do Stardust Racers back to back. It is unbelievably intense. I'm 6'1", 205, and I fit comfortably in the seat. But the one thing I did notice that every time I would go over those I call them the whoop-de-whoops, the hills and the valleys, Stardust Racers has a ton of that, what coaster enthusiasts call ejector airtime, and I could feel it pushing me up into that lap bar, and obviously a lap bar holding you in there, but you're basically pivoting at the waist with all of the force going on. And there were times when I had to put my hand out. You're not supposed to do it, but I had to put my hand out on the seat in front of me, because as we're going through this, it felt like I was going to smack the seat. I know that I couldn't reach it, but your brain starts playing games with you sometimes. So I would brace myself from time to time, put my hand on that seat back in front of me. Stardust Racers, like I said, is very, very, very aggressive. So when Stardust Racers first opened, all the vloggers were covering it, and they were covering Epic Universe. And lately now there's been this big surge of channels with this fat testing and whether or not these theme parks are fat friendly. And the comment was made that Universal was going to be putting on modified seating in certain cars of Stardust Racers to accommodate larger guests. And I believe that happened in July because I was looking for posts, and it looks like around July 11th, if my reading is correct, and if I found the right articles, it looks like those were added around July 11th. So what happened is they modified the original seat, they made it bigger, and they made it, larger opening so that lap bar would accommodate larger guests, especially around the midsection. Because if anybody is bigger on the midsection, that's where the problem is that lap bar just doesn't go down because the stomach gets in the way. The big question is was this guy in one of those modified seats? If the case ends up being that this guy was in one of those modified seats, then this would be at least the second time in a couple years that a guest was killed by riding a ride where the seat had been modified to allow for larger guests to ride. And this is where physics start coming into play here. Also you wonder if they hadn't modified the seats, I'm pretty sure that the normal regular seat, I don't think this guy would have been able to fit, because a lot of these plus size creators weren't able to fit in Stardust Racers. The one guy did, though, the guy from Theme Park Express. He had to do it by lifting his stomach up. That's how he describes it. He lifted his stomach up and he pushed himself way back, and then that lap bar went down. But he even said that on the ride, it was putting an unusually hard amount of force on his upper thighs. And I'm going to show you this. This is where people could get injured on this, and this is where I think what happened with this young man that got killed. So if this represents, right here, if this represents the socket of the pelvis, right, your hip socket, and then this is your femur. If my fist represents your femur ball, and then my arm would represent the femur, the Stardust Racers puts pressure about right here on the femur, so just below the ball joint, which is one of the more weaker parts of the femur if you have serious medical conditions or if you're overweight. And if you're overweight, you're putting an unusual amount of force against that bone. That's what people don't understand. The bigger you get, your skeleton doesn't get any bigger. It grows around the skeleton. And all of that weight pushes on your bones, and it's not hard to break a bone of an extremely overweight person. I've seen it countless times through the emergency room and going out on emergency calls. Again, I'm not fat shaming anybody, but this is real life, folks. What is it? There's a quote by Ayn Rand, I believe it is, and it says, "You can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality." And so what I believe, back to Stardust Racers here, what I believe happened is this guy got in, he rode the ride a few times, but every time going up and over those hills like that, it weakened his femur bones down. Because I think that's how this happens, all right? Because there's been a report that they may have seen a broken bone. Well, again, starting to put everything together here. What I think happened is every time he rode that, it kept weakening down the bone in an already weak area of his body. And like I said, that Stardust Racers puts an unusual amount of pressure right there at the upper femur, on the upper thigh. And I think that last time he rode, his body was probably getting exhausted from riding that ride. That ride is intense. And at some point, he passed out. That we do know. He could have passed out on one of the launches. He could have passed out on one of the, as it comes over that top hat, because it does exert an unusual amount of force. Likely it was on one of the launches, because that's where you get the most force put on the body, and it's easy to pass out, especially if you're on medications, which it did say he was. They didn't disclose the medication, but anything like blood pressure medication and all that, and Stardust Racers strictly says, especially if you're on blood pressure medicine, please stay off this ride, because your body needs more blood pressure when you're riding something that extreme. If you have a medication telling the body to keep the pressure low and the body is calling for more pressure, you're going to pass out because you just don't have enough circulating through your body. And so this guy's strapped into Stardust Racers. He's got the hip bar down. I'm assuming he's in one of those modified seats, because apparently, like I said, those were put in. If he wasn't, I'm not sure that this injury happens, because I don't think he's going to fit in a regular seat, because they are tight. Because I'm 6'1", 205, and that seat hugs me like you're in a race car. And it's a perfect fit, but if somebody that's big, especially up top, is going to have a very hard time fitting in one of those regular seats. And a lot of those other fat content creators, I don't know what else to call them, but that's what, the fat theme park creators, a lot of them couldn't get into the seats for Stardust Racers on the original seat. I think 2 could, but they had to, like I said, they had to lift up their stomachs and whatnot, and it just not a safe way to ride. Or one of them complained about having it hurt quite a bit on the upper thigh area. And so we're going to put in force equals mass times acceleration on this. So let's just say he weighed about 300 pounds. One thing in the emergency services, I get, really good at having to kind of visualize somebody and tell their weight, because sometimes in the field you don't have a scale and you have to weight dose a medication to give somebody. So sometimes you have to do your best and try to guesstimate what they weigh. So I would say he probably falls in the 290 to 310. So if you go on the average, say he's 300, and you multiply that by 62 miles an hour, that's 18,600 pounds of force on his body. And that's just on the launches. Now, we all know that you're not going 62 miles an hour the whole ride. It's only during those little bitty times when you're on the launch. But I would say the average mile an hour pace of that ride is probably somewhere between 35, 40 miles an hour. And even at that, let's just even go on the low side. 35 miles an hour times 300 pounds, you're still exhibiting 10,500 pounds of force on the body. Now let's take somebody, let's just take somebody that's 200 pounds going 35 miles an hour. That's 7,000 pounds. So that's a lot less. And so, like I said, you can't fool physics. And so that's why you have to be in very good health to ride these rides. My best conclusion is that his weight being carried around the center of his body likely probably put too much pressure on those upper femurs there, right where that lap bar sits. And likely it probably broke either one or both legs. And then either before that, he passed out at some point. It was either before or after that. But once you're not able to control yourself, and also if you're in a larger seat that's meant to accommodate larger people, that means bigger openings. So bigger openings but smaller legs. And if you now lose the leg strength, meaning when the femur breaks, the leg is like jello now, there's nothing really holding you there. Now you have the force of the ride. As you go up and over, it's pulling you out. And then as you go down in the valleys, it's pushing you back in. And so you have this constant back and forth and being pulled out, push back in, being pulled out, push back in. And then with all of his weight being centered on the waist and up here, he's like it'd be like a giant pivot, like a hinge, just back and forth, back and forth. And every time you're going back and forth, that force is probably trying to pull you out of that seat. And that's what I think happened. I like I said, this is just me putting everything together. And I think the force of the ride, I think there was some damage done to his legs because of the atrophy going on with his condition, plus the medications he was taking, although it hasn't been disclosed, but you can, as I say, spitball, you can kind of try to figure out which ones they might be. And, you put all that together and a ride that's that forceful, it's not going to be hard for somebody to get seriously injured. And then, as that happened, once he's out, like I said, once he went out, there's no way to brace him. He's now, if he's working his way back and forth like that, he's probably hitting that seat in front of him at, with 10,000 pounds of force every time. That's going to cause an immense amount of injury. In the emergency field, that's what we would call a traumatic injury, and those are very difficult to come back from just because the pounding the body takes, no pun intended. It's just that the amount of hits the body takes like that, it's very hard for the body to come back from that. And, they did say, from what I understand, CPR was started rather quickly once they got this guy out of there and on the platform, and then fire rescue was on scene rather quickly. And they got him transported to the hospital where, like I said, he was pronounced dead at the hospital. The one benefit to this whole thing is that Stardust Racers, because of its nature, just like all the other Universal coasters, you cannot have your phone on you. And your phone has to be downstairs in a locker. That, I think, was the saving grace with this whole thing, because you know how people are. The minute that train got back in the station, which I'm not sure what condition he would have been in, but probably if my theory's correct, he would have been pretty banged up, probably very, very gruesome looking. You know how people are. They would have started taking pictures and video of this, and it would have gone all over the place. If that's the case, I'm glad that nobody was able to do that, because nobody should see that. You know, I've seen things in my line of work over the last almost 20 years, and I've even said it to myself and even my coworkers. I'm like, man, no human should ever, ever, ever have to see this. But, you know, that's part of the job. We'll get into it later, but that's why I love going to theme parks. It's my way of, you know, de-stressing from all that. This is where I go into, I think we're going to see some major, major changes taking place. And I think Stardust Racers is going to be closed for a while. I think what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to do a full reconstruction, you know, because there was a death involved. And because the freaking attorney that signed on to this, I feel bad for the family because they're already going through enough. But now they got this Ben Crump guy, the freaking ambulance chasing lawyer that, you know, we all know that he's been on all the high profile cases, and this is high profile. So now that he's involved, now they're going after manslaughter and then civil rights violations, which, like I said, I'm not sure how you violate somebody's civil rights. These rides are more than accommodating for pretty much anybody. And you could make the argument that they're too accommodating because somebody got seriously injured and then died from their injuries. You know, and then how you're going to get a manslaughter charge, I have no idea, because the guy made the decision to ride. You know, I've ridden Stardust Racers. You go past countless warnings, and he still made the decision that I'm going to ride this 5 or 6 times. And sadly, the last time he rode it was when all of this happened. And again, I'm going to say it again. My description is just what I've pieced together inside my paramedic brain, because to me, it's what makes sense. Having ridden that ride multiple times, it seems logical that that's probably what happened. You know, I really didn't want to do a video like this, but there's so many of them out there. I'm like, I want to give my input on this, and not to be disrespectful to the patient or anything, but to try to give everybody an idea of what may have happened, you know, to try to give people an idea of how the body works when it's under, you know, extreme duress like that. Because of all the theme park creators out there, as far as I know, I'm the only paramedic. I'm the only one with very high level of medical knowledge. This is why I'm talking about this. I'm going to say it a million times, but I'm not doing this out of any disrespect. I just trying to get some ideas out there to give everybody something to think about, you know, that this is probably what happened. And I think coming out of this, I think all of these modified seats for the plus size guests, I think you're going to see those go away. I think they're going to have to get really stringent on this, and I know this is going to cause a lot of issues. It's going to be a lot of blowback, but you can't have it both ways, folks. You can't have it to where these parks modify the seats and these rides so that, you know, overweight and handicapped guests can ride these. And you can't have that, but then you can't also not have the possibility of severe injury or death even. So it's going to have to basically go back to the way it was. And people have said, oh, well, the over-the-shoulder harness would have been better, would have saved him. Folks, I can tell you right now, the over-the-shoulder harness would not have done much of anything, because if that was the case, he probably wouldn't have been able to ride at all, because with his dimensions, there's no way that would have gone down around him. It would not have fit. How he probably got on that ride is, like I said, if he was in one of those modified seats, he probably shimmied himself back far enough, and then like the one guy did, he basically lifted his stomach up, and the lap bar was able to come down, and his stomach's rested on top of the lap bar. And then you have all that force pushing on the upper part of the femurs on the thigh there. And then you have a top-heavy individual that's lost his strength and is now getting slammed back and forth due to the nature of that ride. So I think they're going to go back to the regular standard seating, and I really think that anybody that cannot transfer out of a wheelchair or that is a paraplegic of some kind, I don't think they're going to be able to allow them to ride on these extreme rides anymore. I have heard that the word is out that I think it's Hyperion, the roller coaster overseas at, hope I'm saying this right, it's at Thorpe Park, I believe. If I'm not at the right theme park, let me know. But I have heard Hyperion has changed their policies already regarding who can ride that ride. So that's why I think you're going to see sweeping changes made. And again, probably not going to be good for a lot of people. Probably going to be a lot of people mad. But in my own opinion, of course, I'd rather see people upset and angry than to have something like this happen again. So we'll have to wait and see in time whether or not I'm right on these theme park changes as far as the coasters go and even all the other extreme rides. But I think I'm probably on the right track with that. And Stardust Racers, I would say probably is going to be closed for a while. I would say probably would be lucky to have it back up and running by Thanksgiving or maybe even Christmas, because when you have something this high profile that's going on, they got to take everything into consideration, and they have to go through and they have to think about it. So they have to go through and then get with the ride manufacturers and then try to say, how do you want to proceed with this? Do you want to take the seats out that accompany larger guests? Do you want to go back to the regular seating? And I'm not saying that this is only affecting larger guests. Heck, somebody that's of smaller size that's even a paraplegic that's riding a ride like that could have the same thing happen. But the difference is they would probably have a very similar thing happen, but they're not going to hit with as much force because there's not as much weight up top. But there still is the potential for injury. So I don't want you to think that I'm only focusing on folks that are extremely overweight. It could happen to anybody. So moving forward, I think that if you have some kind of paralysis below the waist, I don't think you're going to be able to ride these extreme rides like that anymore. I mean, Velocicoaster at Universal, you cannot ride if you have your foot in a cast or a boot. They won't let you ride it. So if it's that strict on Velocicoaster that you can't ride if your foot is in a cast or a boot, then why should Stardust Racers be any different, especially somebody that's paralyzed below the waist? Let me get this clear, too. It hasn't said that this guy's been paralyzed below the waist, but when you look at the picture of him, the picture speaks for itself. They did say he had a major spinal injury. He's sitting in a wheelchair. He's got a lap belt around him, and his legs are a whole lot smaller than the whole top part of his body. I mean, you just put all those together, that just spells out that he's highly possibly a paraplegic. How he got into the coaster car, that's another big question. Was he helped? Did he transfer himself? Because I have heard that to ride Stardust Racers, you have to be able to self-transfer. So I'm not sure how that went, or if his girlfriend that was with him helped him in there and it was overlooked. Like I said, these are all things that are going to have to be figured out as time goes on. But let me know down in the comments, do y'all think there's going to be some major changes coming forward? And where do you think I am on this? Do you think I'm on the right track? Do you think I'm way out in left field on this? Do you think I'm out of my mind? I'd like to know your thoughts and opinions on this. Like I said, nobody else has dared to venture into this that has any medical knowledge that's in the theme park vlogging community, if you will. So that's why I wanted to sit down and do this. And as I said before in the beginning, no disrespect to this young man. Sadly, he lost his life. And I think this is going to be a turning point in the way operations are done on these extreme rides at the theme parks. It's very similar to how weather events are handled at major events. Have you ever noticed, if you're at a football game, concert, anything that's outdoors, the minute lightning or any bad weather is within like 15 to 20 miles, everything gets emptied out and everybody has to go into shelter, and it has to be 30 minutes past the last lightning strike before they get anything even started again. That was formed after the Indiana State Fair stage collapse in 2011, I believe it was. I was living in Indiana at that time, and it was a Sugarland concert. They were going to play at the Indiana State Fair. In fact, I almost went to that, but there was the prediction of really bad weather, and so I didn't want to be out there in bad weather, so I decided I'll just stay home. And then the very next morning, I see on the news that the State Fair stage collapsed because of the bad weather. Basically, the wind blew it over onto a whole bunch of patrons waiting to see the concert, and that was a horrible catastrophe. And so that event right there changed how we do everything, at least here in the United States, when it regards to weather. So I have a feeling that this event is going to change how things are done in the theme park industry as far as how these extreme rides go. So to wrap up, I hope for comfort, healing, and prayers with the family. I hope they can, get the answers they need and then get some healing. I hope this attorney that signed on, that's this Ben Crump, doesn't start causing too many problems. The family's already got enough to deal with. You can agree or disagree with me, but I do not like this guy. He just goes chasing after the money with these high profile cases. I have no respect for people that do that. You want to represent somebody, fine, but if you look at his track record, he only goes after these big profile cases. They're going to make him a lot of money, and it's very irritating. The family doesn't need all that extra stress at this time. And so, yeah, that's it. That's all I got, folks. Hope this gave everybody something to think about. Like I said, don't want to be morbid, don't want to be, don't want to give bad thoughts on this, but it's just what my mind comes up with when I think about stuff like this. So we'll see you on the next one. And if there's any other updates, believe me, I'll bring them to you. Like I said, I have a feeling I'm probably on the right track with this just by listening to the injuries and everything else going on. So I'll see you on the next one, everybody. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you soon.